John here. Morning. I was been going to do this video for days and weeks, and what's going on in the world right now with these vaccines and whatever it is. I'm not going to say what is and what isn't. I've been watching this from here in Thailand since it began back in 2019, and what's being put out in the press and that American TV is not exactly what I saw here, but that's besides the point. What I wanted to talk about today is everyone's always saying they do this, they do that. This is I designed this little shirt. It says, "Who are they?" And I got the little devil sticking out there from behind the question mark. A lot of people think there isn't a they. I think there is a they. And I don't think they're a good they. So let's get into it here. I'm going to, as I said in my other videos, I've always loved to read, and I've read a lot of books. And how I read a book, I want to explain to you off the top, is I take the book, I read it. Then I go through the book the next time with a marker. And I'll go through the book and I'll mark out in yellow. Usually I use yellow. I don't know why, but I like yellow. Yellow makes me feel happy. And I mark certain things that jump off the page into my brain. Then I go back and read the book for the third time. And in my brain, I highlight what I highlighted. I've been encouraged to read all my life. My dad encouraged me to read. He said, "You're never going to amount to anything if you spend all your time reading." So just to defy him, I read more. That's my personality. So here goes. Now, my idea was to totally focus on Annie Jacobsen's book, Operation Paperclip, that talks about the CIA taking the Nazi scientists from Germany, and there's a lot more to this than just this. I'm hoping to interest people. Mark Twain said, "A man who doesn't read has no advantage over a man who can't." So I'm going to read for you. I'm going to give you my opinion. I tried to start my YouTube channel. I called it An Alien View because everyone's always told me that I kind of have a funny way of looking at things. And unfortunately, YouTube seems to not like the word alien. And when I put alien in as a view of what an alien might think when they look at Earth, I couldn't find it anywhere on YouTube, so changed it back to my name, but it's still An Alien View. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I don't think this is a cartoon. I think this is the next step. I think this is what they're going to do. I think this is what they've already done, and I think whatever they've been spraying is still out there. I don't think this virus is it. I think there's more to come. So I want people to be aware of what's going on. Now, I started with this. The Nazi philosophy was the sword and the shield. The sword being the virus, the weapon, the weaponized virus, the weaponized bacteria, many swords in warfare. And the shield is the protection against the sword. The Nazi philosophy, Hitler's thinking was, if they didn't have the shield, they couldn't release the sword. And Hitler had thousands and thousands of bombs tipped with various viruses he could have unleashed at any time. And they actually had planned to do it against the Russians after they lost Stalingrad, but never happened. I don't know why. Dr. Schreiber, he was the Nazi Surgeon General, kind of like America's Fauci. Dr. Kurt Bloom was Schreiber's deputy. his big thing was weaponizing bubonic plague. We'll get into that more. Erich Traub was a virologist. Himmler sent him to Turkey because they didn't allow anyone to keep these diseases in Europe. He went to Turkey during the war. Himmler sent him and tried to get the virus of Rinderpest, which is a hoof and mouth disease, a cattle disease that we're going to they spray it on the grass and kill all the cows so that your enemy would starve to death. Dornberger, Walter Dornberger, he almost single-handedly changed the thinking in the late 40s when they got him. He was the one that convinced the military in the United States that Russia was coming. He instigated the hatred and the fear against Russia by the American public. He was a bad dude. He eventually got sent back. I think he ended up, Schreiber ended up in Argentina when they finally kicked him out, and Dornberger ended up somewhere else too. Erich Traub, he ended up in Iran. The United States sent him back to Germany, and from Germany he went to Iran. If you ever wonder why the States was so hard on Iran, maybe it's got something to do with him. Arthur Rudolph. Arthur Rudolph, he was a bad bugger too. He was specialist in assembling the V-2 rockets, and eventually he worked with Wernher von Braun to get Americans to the moon, developing rocket technology. George Rickey, he built the Fuhrer bunker. He was an architect, and he designed the concentration camps. Kurt Debus, another, he's a great one. He's another engineer. Now, this guy became the first director of Cape Canaveral of the NASA program in Florida. Then we get into this guy, Otto Ambros. I'm going to really concentrate on him because he was convicted of mass murder and slavery and sentenced to 8 years or whatever in prison in Nuremberg or Landsberg, the prison where Hitler had written Mein Kampf. And he got out. They took him after a couple of years, got him out, and spirited him away to America. Now, this guy kind of pisses me off, but he lived to be a ripe old 92. After everything he'd done, they allowed him. And this guy, he was famous in Texas. They named libraries and universities after him. And let's get into it. Now, I can review this, where it started. Now, I started to do the Operation Paperclip, and that brought me to another book, this one by Mike Rupert. Now, Mike Rupert, after he was famous, he had a newsletter called From the Wilderness. He's the one that broke the story in the first place of the DEA and the American government supplying the drugs that were shipped in from South America, the cocaine basically, and he proved that the CIA was involved in it. They made a movie out of it. I think Tom Cruise, whatever, starred in it, and they made light of it. But in actual fact, it's the CIA was complicit in drug dealing to finance covert operations that they didn't want the government to know about. And you got to remember that these people we're talking about here, they think of the government as just a bunch of elected nerds that are only going to be in there for a little while, so don't tell them anything they don't need to know. And if you think the President of the United States knows what's going on, he doesn't. It's somebody else. It's they, whoever they are. Anyway, the story of Mike. I like to tell the story of Mike. Mike Hastings here. He wrote a book called The Operators, which showed the corruption in higher echelons of the military in Iraq and Iran, Afghanistan, all around the Middle East. After he made the money from the book, he went out and he treated himself. He bought himself a Mercedes-Benz. Just happened to be the first Mercedes-Benz that ever blew up in the middle of the street. Like driving down the street, the thing blew up. They said it was an accident. He hit something, but the transmission was found like hundreds of feet away from the actual burnt out shell of his new car. Of course, Mike didn't make it through. Mike and Mike's story. So this one here, I just picked out a couple of things that I wanted just to read. I had forgotten about this. That's why it's taken me so long to make this video. But this book is about 9/11. And what a lot of people forget about is that after 9/11, there was a lot of people in the government, different people, sent little packages of anthrax. Personally, and only my opinion, I think they were given a warning. Like, we can do this anytime we want. And it was military-grade anthrax. They know it. You know, whatever. I don't want to get into 9/11. I think that was a scam too. But what we're talking about here is serious. Now, the anthrax that was set free, and this, I'm just a little overview. Now, the company that the government hired to investigate and watch was a company that never watched what was going on with the anthrax. It was a company that never made a vaccine before. So the largest shareholder was the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I don't know how this company got involved in anthrax after. Anyway, I just wanted to read a couple of things, and it hit home for me because they talk about the big three, Baxter, Bayer, and Ron Poulenc, who they talk about how during the 80s, 7,000 Americans were given tainted blood. It's kind of personal for me, being a Canadian. My brother-in-law was given bad blood. I thought it was herpes. I don't know. Maybe they just said herpes. So this is talking about smallpox as a weapon. We know they did it. Just a little overview here. We're talking, this is in Mike's book, Mike Rupert's book. They're talking about vaccinating people for smallpox. In 2002, it was near hysterical attention was focused on smallpox. The Homeland Security Bill was debated and voted on. Now, there were freaking people out. They were saying, you know, Bayer, the subsidiary of IG Farben, the major German company that made, among other things, Zyklon B for the gassing, was, and IG Farben was broken up in 1939. It's in another book here. In 1939, Rockefeller and IG Farben created the Drug Trust Alliance. Now, that was 1939. That was at the beginning of the Second World War. Rockefeller, like a lot of Americans, Rockefeller, Ford, Bushes, they were all on the Nazi side. They believed the ideology of white men first. And make a long story short, these companies were subsidiaries, or not subsidiaries, IG Farben was broken up after the war because it had too many fingers in too many things. They created Auschwitz for labor, for their factory to make these chemicals. Okay, so the drug trust was created before the war by IG Farben and Rockefeller. Now, after the war, IG Farben was broken up into General Mills, Kellogg's, Nestle, Bristol Myers Squibb, Procter Gamble, and Roche, Sanofi Aventis, many companies who created many subsidiary companies. This was all these companies that are making our food had Nazi war criminal chairmen of the board for 30 years after the war, into the 80s, and I don't know now, the ideology is still there. That's what I'm trying to get across here. It's not, you can't go back and do anything about what happened, but you can change the minds of the people who believe that what happened was right. That's why I'm doing these videos. It's to give people a little bit of information about what happened and try and get them to look at how they think now has been manipulated by these people. And it's in advertising and everything. Like Pfizer, back in 1862, he started to make his money by selling bandages and cleaning, like, I don't know if it was alcohol, what they used, sugar water, saline water, to irrigate the wounds of Civil War soldiers. And then he made his real money in the 1880s and 1890s when Coke was having a problem because cocaine was one of the main ingredients, and they had to play with the formula and that to try and keep the taste and get rid of the cocaine when cocaine was made illegal. Pfizer made his big money selling citric acid to Coke and Dr. Pepper, and that was back in like 1880s. Okay, when the citric acid worked too good and the price fell because the shelf life of the product was extended so far that they didn't need it anymore. So they started to think of other things. And one of the things that just comes to mind is toothpaste. Because if you really look at your toothpaste and read it, adults and children 2 years old and over, do not swallow. Okay? Children under 6 years of age should only use a pea-sized amount and be supervised under supervision to use toothpaste. It says, warning, keep out of reach of children. If swallowed, call a poison control center or get medical help right away. Okay? Make your teeth nice and white. No problem. All you have to do is poison yourself. Another thing that I had, being a Canadian, I went to Banting Memorial High School in Alliston for a few years, not many. We'll get into that again. But I just got into talking about, thinking about insulin at the time, and my sister spends a fortune to try and get insulin to keep her alive, and her and millions of other people do. Now, just a couple of things that when they were developing insulin, 8 ounces of insulin, you need 2.5 tons of beef or pork pancreas just to start. So it was a process at the time. Banting and Best, they sold the formula to the University of Toronto for $1 with the thinking that by giving the producers of the insulin the patent, the formula for free, the price would be kept down so that insulin could be available to a lot of sick people, which it didn't turn out to be like that. Now, politics was involved when a Supreme Court judge's daughter. He wanted the insulin to keep his daughter alive, and she lived to be, I think, 74 or something like that. But politics overrode the goodness of Dr. Banting and Best. What happened was the University of Toronto didn't have it. They couldn't produce the insulin. It's really complicated. So they gave Eli Lilly Company the rights to produce it, and the university was supposed to get back 28% of the profits from it. It's a complicated story, but look into it. Insulin should be free. Okay, so that's a little bit. Some of that came out of going back and looking at. For me, going back and looking at a book that I'd read a long time ago and I'd forgot just how important Mike Rupert was and how many things that he brought to the fore. I just want to read a little bit out of this before I quit here. Here I go. I keep rubbing my nose. I got an itchy nose. Okay, so this was da-da-da-da-da-da-da. This was a woman. In 2002, she had written this. Smallpox is not highly fatal. There are treatments. Vaccine will not protect you from getting the infection. The vaccine has high complication rates. It's an experimental drug, and there are many contradictions. Okay. This is back into CDC planned to increase the number of first responders who received the vaccination to 500,000 from the agreed upon 15,000. The bigger the vaccination plan was possible because the government was giving them more money. So now they get back into it and they talk about it more. World health records, England, Germany, Italy, and the Philippines, British India, document that devastating epidemics followed the mass vaccinations. The worst smallpox disaster occurred in the Philippines after a 10-year compulsory U.S. program administered 25 million vaccinations to its population of 10 million. That's about 2.5 shots per person, resulting in 170,000 cases and more than 75,000 deaths from smallpox in a country having only scattered cases in rural villages prior to the compulsory vaccination. Take it as you see it. I encourage everybody to go back and research a little bit and read a little bit about the vaccination program for the anthrax that many people may have been exposed to. I'm wary of anything that says, anything from the news or the government says may, might have, apparently, could, seem to show. Watch for those words and understand those words mean they're lying. Okay? So anyway, the government gave the contract to, they're going to make 500 million. What do they got? 500 million shots of 300 million doses of smallpox vaccine, 200 million doses of Cipro. This Bioport company that they're giving this contract to had never made a vaccine before, but the chairman of it, the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon, was its largest shareholder and a member of the board of directors. So keep that in mind too. Even though smallpox wouldn't be fatal. Then he goes on in this book, and this is a really important book. Mike Sconnie isn't going to be doing any more work, but He did a lot of work. We need all read this book, okay? He goes on and talks about 14 or 15 really prominent biologists ended up dying mysterious deaths in the few years after 2001 attack. Okay, that's it for that book. Now we're going to get into the serious stuff here. This is Operation Paperclip. This was the operation where the Nazi scientists were brought to America to continue the work. So I just want to read you a couple of little things out of here. We talked about who these people were. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about what they did and what happened. Part of the reason as well that they wanted to bring these people, the scientists, over was the chemical companies. Defense contracts meant that there was business in the wings waiting to be transacted. German scientists' knowledge and know-how would be fully and freely available to all Americans. The boom to industry would help create tens of thousands of American jobs. Science would help create 60 million jobs as science unfolded in the future. Now we got to remember, during the war, the Soviets did most of the work. If you look back in history, it was September 1939 when Hitler actually invaded Poland and started the Second World War. That's when France and Britain declared war, blah, blah, blah. It involved a lot of people and a lot of BS, but people forget. The United States wasn't involved in it. That was 1939. The States didn't get involved till December 1941 with Pearl Harbor. After the war, even before the war was over, the thinking was, and famously General Patton wanted to go and just wipe out the Soviets while the armies were already there, and that stopped. It couldn't happen. Couldn't happen. There's no money and no war. They had to have war. They couldn't have the war stop. Even though my alien view is the aliens aren't going to let us nuke each other. The governments know it. So, as Bob Marley said, wars and rumors of war. A rumor of a war seems to affect people the same way as a real war. Okay, so then they're talking here about the Soviet Union and the different people in, I don't even want to call it government, the people in the military. They wanted to keep this thing going. They weren't even telling the president what they were thinking, okay? But this is what the powers that be in America were working for. In other words, for the United States to prepare for total war with the Soviets, America had to maintain supremacy in all areas of war fighting, including chemical warfare, biological warfare, atomic warfare, and any other kind of warfare the other side dreamed up. Unbelievable. They couldn't think of peace. All this technology, and they use it for war. And we call ourselves an intelligent species. All right. I'm going to talk Kurt Bloom, Dr. Bloom. Okay. He was an expert on live pathogens, live plague pathogens, including bubonic and pneumonic plague. Nice guy. That's what he worked on. You got to remember, the reason these scientists advanced so fast in Nazi Germany was they used live people as guinea pigs in the experiments. They gave people bubonic plague, and then at various stages of the onset of the disease, they would kill them and dissect them to see how it was affecting their bodies. So they killed and dissected people until they died of the disease itself, and studied them. These are the people whose ideology has permeated the United States. Okay. Merck. They're talking about Merck. The Merck Report. The Merck Report warned an invisible and insidious evil capable of killing millions on a vast, unknowable scale. He's scaring everybody about what might happen if some evil entity gets a hold of these drugs. Well, his company made the first vaccine, smallpox vaccine, in 1898. And in 1942, they started manufacturing penicillin. And you can't, as my friend Glenn Robertson channel would say, you can't make this stuff up. The man diagnosing the bioweapons threat, George Merck, was also the man whose company might sell the government the solution to combat the threat. Where have we seen that before? Okay, duh. Here we go. Okay, then we're going to talk. This Schreiber guy, Schreiber, the Russians had him first. They gave him up to the British, and the British gave him to America, and eventually all his lies caught up to him, and they paid him off and sent him to Argentina, where he bought himself a big ranch and lived happily ever after. Okay. He claimed he knew nothing about anything. Okay. Schreiber testifying against Blum. I do not know any details about them, talking about experiments. I only know that aircraft were used for spraying tests with bacteria emulsions, and that insects harmful to plants such as beetles were experimented with. But I cannot give any details. I didn't do the experiments myself. And then as I got further on into here, and it starts talking about LSD, and Frank Olson, he famously, they gave him LSD, didn't know, he freaked out and jumped out through a window. He was a real top-notch scientist. And when you look back, he died. They determined it to be a suicide after all the, in like 53, 54. These guys. In the late 40s and early 50s, Olson traveled across the United States overseeing field tests that dispersed biological agents from aircraft and crop dusters in San Francisco, the Midwest, and Alaska. Some field tests involved harmless simulants, and others involved dangerous pathogens. On and on, Olson and his colleague Norman Cornwire, the two men went to Alaska and oversaw bacteria being sprayed out of airplanes to see how the pathogens would disperse in an environment similar to that of harsh Russian winters. We used a spore which is very similar to anthrax, so to the extent we did something that was not kosher, because we picked it up all over the United States months after we did the tests. Damn, you imagine that? They sprayed stuff from the airplanes, and then the funny thing is that they found out that dry pathogens stayed on the ground. I started to do this video a few days ago, and my wife wasn't here, and by the time I ended up, my phone ran out of space, and I was an hour and 57 minutes into it. So I got to stop that now. I'm talking a lot, and I'm going to go back and cut it. But people have to know, the ICBM that was developed by Wernher von Braun, his name isn't even on there. In the factory he worked at, connected to Auschwitz when they were working for the factory where they assembled the V2 weapons that he was in charge of. They figured 30,000 slave laborers died there. So on his deathbed, von Braun apparently had said, be careful. The next step after convincing everyone that they had to go against terrorists, that they didn't know where they were, the next step is alien false flag. They have the technology to build machines that look like alien spacecraft, and they're going to make us start a war with aliens. Donald Trump, Space Force. People, this is real. They are out there, okay? Couple of more things I wanted to talk about. Just to say, Agent Orange, okay? These people are responsible for so many things I can't get in. Agent Orange, I just want to read this. Remember when? I grew up during Vietnam. That's how I got screwed up in my head, okay? The Army's herbicidal warfare program during Vietnam War started in August 1961 and lasted until February 1971. More than 11.4 million gallons of Agent Orange were spread over approximately 24% of South Vietnam, destroying 5 million acres of uplands and forests and 500,000 acres of fruit crops, an area about the size of the state of Massachusetts. An additional 8 million gallons of other anti-crop agents, codenamed Agents White, Pink, Blue, Purple, and Green, were also sprayed, mostly from C-123 cargo planes. They were researching the effects of a dioxin. Okay, the soldiers in Vietnam tried to take the government to war, but I guess it's been all hushed up. Then we're talking about over here, the same Hoffman, not the Hoffman that made LSD, another Hoffman. They're working on Rinderpest, and they figured to kill all the cows. But yeah, the agents and diseases being studied at Fort Detrick Research at the time, this is in 2013, meant to decimate specific animal populations, including rinderpest, hoof and mouth disease, virus 3 disease of swine, fowl plague, bird flu, Newcastle disease, and fowl malaria. The work remained classified as of 2013, and he couldn't find anything more out about it, okay? But they're doing the work there. Remember, when you're listening to this, Wuhan, there's 46 countries working in that Wuhan lab, and most of them working there because they weren't allowed to do that work in their own country. These guys were evil. Dornberger, he ended up working for Bell Aircraft. In 1957, they sent Dornberger out, Bell Aircraft sent them out to do the hard sell to the people from the Pentagon. And he's trying to sell Bell Aircraft's bomber missile to the Pentagon. It was designed for nuclear combat in space. He's trying to sell this BOMI, they called it, to an audience of Air Force officials. When they started to insult him, somebody said something abusive and insulting to him. Dornberger turned around and said, "Yet I'd receive a lot more respect if I'd had a chance to fly these against you in the war." Nice guy. Wernher von Braun. Von Braun, even on his deathbed, he said, "Be careful." And he, von Braun, as evil as he may have been, he was afraid of the people that he was working for in the United States. And it isn't the United States government. It's something else. It's more. All right? Pretty hilarious. Anyway, this book is too much. Someday, I'd like to do a 2-hour documentary, but quite honestly, I got no money. I do this on my own time, and I do this for fun. It pisses me off that we live in a world with all this technology, and the people are such slaves to the money system. Money's made up. Money's not real. Money's made up. They can create. I'll tell you what. I'm gonna do a video again about how my thinking got to be this way. Let's just say in grade 9, I did a book report on a book called Black Like Me. That was a guy who turned his skin black and traveled around southern states in the late 50s. That turned my thinking, and I realized that being born a white guy in Canada, I guess I have an advantage. I had an advantage over everybody else, or not everybody else, but most people in the world. And that book, the teacher I did that book report for, I asked him, I said, you know, how can everybody in the world, every country in the world be in debt? That doesn't make any sense if everybody's in debt. So where's the money come from? And he just told me, he said, check into the Federal Reserve. I can't really tell you, but check into the Federal Reserve. And then I started checking into it. The Federal Reserve, they don't make anything but money. The World Bank, they don't make anything. They got no production facilities where they make chocolate bars and then take the profit from the chocolate bars and give it out to poor countries so they can eat. The money comes from nowhere. They make it up. The Federal Reserve. People think that the American government's going into debt. Who are they going into debt? 20 trillion? Think about it. They borrow the money from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is not part of the government. The people that represent you Americans, they borrow the money from a private company who has no production facilities. All they make is money. They make money with money. It's a scam. That's the problem. Okay. Thank you. Please educate yourselves. Bob Marley said it. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but yourselves can free your mind. Have no fear of atomic energy, because none of them can stop the time. And that's it. We can't stop what's happened. We don't need to dwell on all that. What we need to dwell on is what is happening now and realize the mistakes we've made and change the thinking. This Nazi ideology has permeated the United States. You're not superior in any other way than that you can make more money. Well, gee, give me a machine and I'll make money all day too. If you believe that it has some sort of value. God bless y'all. Please read these books. Operation Paperclip, Crossing the Rubicon, and The Operators. Peace out.